Well, economic recovery proves a tough battle for the local economy. Data from Stats SA shows that the gross domestic product contracted by 1.5% in the third quarter. The economy battled tight lockdown restrictions, load shedding and the civil unrest in the quarter. 6 industries recorded negative growth in the third quarter, with the largest negative contributors being trade, manufacturing and agriculture. The agriculture industry decreased by 13.6%, mainly due to decreased production of field crops and animal products. Trade decreased by 5.5%, with the largest decreases in economic activity reported for wholesale, retail and motor trade. The manufacturing industry also recorded a sizable decrease, with 8 of the 10 manufacturing divisions reporting negative growth rates in the third quarter. Well, to unpack the numbers for us, I'm joined by Nedbank senior economist Nicky Weimar. She's from Nedbank. Thank you very much for joining us, Nicky. Now, of course, we've gone through in the introduction some of the decreases that we saw, but perhaps we can just home in on manufacturing. To what extent do you think that overall 4.2% decrease is a factor of load shedding for one and the riots on the other?
Yeah, obviously in the third quarter that had an enormous effect. You must also remember that load shedding has been constant. It was particularly acute in the third quarter. So that clearly disrupted production. And then KwaZulu-Natal and those parts of Gauteng that were affected by the riots, manufacturing makes up quite a big share of GDP in those areas. And these were clearly also unsettled. And even as, these industries started to emerge from that trouble, we had additional issues at Transnet. We often forget there was a cyber attack at Transnet, resulting in huge congestion at the ports that also contributed clearly and affected exports, which we saw in this number in a very big way, that exports fell faster than imports, and also obviously fed back into how much you would produce at the end of the day. So I think all of those things combined, plus the fact that we went through a prolonged third wave that only really resulted in better conditions towards the end of August and throughout September.
Yeah. And what about this supply constraint that we're always hearing about globally because of the COVID-19 situation? People are saying supply chains have been arrested to some degree. To what extent is that also affecting the manufacturing sector here in South Africa?
Yes, I think it does affect us, and it would certainly have had an impact, but I don't think it was the biggest impact. Really, where that will start to come and play is if you were ramping up production very sharply and very rapidly, and you put in big orders for parts, and that didn't materialize or it was delayed because of supply chain issues. It's been an enormous global issue, especially in the automotive industry, and it's affected our automotive production as well. But generally speaking, given the low base we're coming off, it's not that visible in the numbers.
Yeah.
Where it's actually disrupted growth in many other parts of the world, added and aggravated price pressures. It's been less of an issue here because our recovery has been that much slower.
Yeah. One of the things that saved National Treasury when they delivered their midterm budget in November, was the issue of the commodities boom that's been thriving. But I do see that exports did come down, even though overall they were a positive contributor to the GDP. What's your sense of the trend around exports for South African companies?
Yeah, now going forward, I think we will live in a very different world. The global economy up to now has actually provided us with our biggest boost that have helped us climb out of that deep trench we fell into during level 5 lockdown last year. So it's provided us with a nice little wind, a nice little lift, and a boost. We got it in the form of stronger global demand and, of course, that nice and fantastic little surge we saw in commodity prices, particularly those commodities that South Africa export from gold, platinum, iron ore, coal. All of those prices moved sharply higher. That's not going to be sustained, I think, during the rest of this year and into next year especially. Part of the reason for that is that China's growth is rapidly losing momentum. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they are encountering quite a big drag from a property market that is heavily indebted, construction activity that have declined. And so the property woes, the real estate woes in China will probably result in slower growth. But China's also in the process of a big structural adjustment. They want to realign their economy. You're seeing a lot of regulatory intervention that you haven't seen before. And normally when economies go through these kind of realignments, in China specifically, they want to move to higher end manufacturing. They want to play a bigger role in the green manufacturing industry. And they want to restructure their economy towards greater services, greater consumption. And that will probably mean less demand for commodities and greater pressure on commodity prices. So I think there's a very good chance that we won't see the big boost we got from exports and commodity prices in 2021 won't be repeated in 2022, and that's going to contribute to slower growth.
Nikki, during the quarter. One last question, Nikki. Are we doing enough to catalyse economic growth in South Africa, given the fact that we're only expected to grow sub 2% in the coming years? Not this year, we're going to jump by 5%, but going forward, sub 2%.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, there's some serious structural constraints on this economy. The biggest one is that we just do not have enough electricity. So we know that problem can't be resolved quickly, but we have to ask ourselves, have we done everything we can to resolve that problem? And my instinct tells me we haven't. We could have moved quicker with the deregulation. We could have allowed far greater activity to occur. We could have made that concession of 100 megawatts of embedded generation last year already. And so we haven't moved quickly. Where we have effective positive change, as we've seen in energy regulation, it's come very slowly. And with long delays. And so that means that we haven't managed to really resolve that constraint, and it's still going to weigh on us. Other than that, we do need tourism to recover. It's a labor-intensive industry. It's where a lot of jobs are created for the type of labor force that South Africa has, which is generally a large amount of unskilled to semi-skilled labor. And that's where they get absorbed and find meaningful employment. So I think it is very important that we deal with COVID. And that requires vaccinations. So we do need to make some serious decisions around how we're going to accelerate the rate of vaccinations so that South Africa does not experience renewed travel bans as we just have, and that just completely disrupts any kind of recovery in those industries.
Nikki, thank you very much for your insights. As always, Nicky Weimar, she's the chief economist at Nedbank.